The sound of sneakers squeaking against polished wood filled the Lakewood High gymnasium. The scent of sweat and old leather clung to the air as players darted across the court, their jerseys damp with effort. The Lakewood Eagles were in the middle of an intense practice session preparing for the upcoming state qualifiers. Among them was Jake Carter, struggling to keep up. At 19, Jake had the height for basketball, 6'3", but lacked the lean, sculpted build of his teammates. His body was heavy, his movements slower, and every sprint up and down, the court felt like dragging weights. He had joined the team with a dream, but the reality was far harsher than he had imagined. "Move, Carter!" Coach Stevens barked, his voice echoing. "Get in position!" Jake rushed to cover his man, panting, wiping sweat from his brow. Just as he settled into a defensive stance, the ball zipped past him. Dylan Harper, the team's star player and captain, spun past Jake with practiced ease and went for an easy layup. The ball swished through the net, and Dylan landed smoothly, smirking as he turned to face Jake. "Nice defense, Carter," Dylan taunted. "I almost felt pressure there." Almost. Snickers rippled through the court. Jake clenched his jaw, swallowing his frustration. It wasn't the first time Dylan humiliated him in front of the team. He was everything Jake wasn't. Fast, lean, and born into basketball royalty. His father, a former NBA player, had made sure Dylan was trained since childhood, and it showed. Every movement was effortless, every shot precise. "Again, Coach." Stevens called out the players' reset. Jake tried to focus, tried to anticipate Dylan's next move. The ball was passed, and in a blur, Dylan dashed forward. Jake braced himself, determined not to be outplayed again. But as he moved to block, Dylan pulled a slick crossover. Jake's feet tangled, and before he knew it, he was hitting the floor. Laughter erupted. "Man, you're like a human traffic cone." Dylan sneered, stepping over Jake. "Might as well paint yourself orange." Jake's face burned as he pushed himself up. He caught a few sympathetic looks from the bench, but sympathy didn't help. It just made him feel smaller. The practice dragged on, but nothing changed. Every play, every drill, Jake was just another obstacle for Dylan to breeze past. When the final whistle blew, he was the last to leave the court. As he walked toward the locker room, he heard hushed voices and laughter. Rounding the corner, his stomach dropped. His locker had been vandalized. Bold red letters spelled out, "Jake, the dead weight." His heart pounded. His fingers curled into fists, nails digging into his palms. The voices behind him weren't even trying to hide their amusement. "Guess the team's got to carry you on and off the court, huh?" Someone jeered. Jake didn't turn around. He simply grabbed his gym bag and walked out. That night he sat on his bed, staring at the crumpled jersey in his hands. The number on it felt like a joke. He had dreamed of wearing it since he was a kid, watching NBA games with his dad, practicing shots on the cracked pavement of their neighborhood's rundown court. But dreams didn't change reality. A soft knock at his door. His mom, Sarah Carter, stepped in. "You okay?" she asked gently. Jake didn't answer at first. He just exhaled, staring at the ceiling. "Maybe I should just quit." She crossed the room and sat beside him. "Why?" He let out a bitter chuckle. "Because I'm not built for this. Everyone sees it. I'm slow, I'm heavy, I'm not like them." His mother studied him for a moment before speaking. "I'm not going to tell you what to do, Jake. But if you're going to walk away, make sure it's because you decided to. Not because someone else made you feel like you had to." She gently took the jersey from his hands and placed it on the bed. Then she kissed his forehead and left the room. Jake sat there for a long time, staring at the jersey. Maybe he really wasn't built like the others. But did that mean he couldn't play? The following evening, after another grueling practice, he didn't go straight home. Instead, he wandered to a public basketball court a few blocks from his house. It was empty, dimly lit by flickering streetlights. The chain-link fence rattled in the wind. He picked up a worn-out basketball from the sidelines and started shooting. No pressure, No mocking voices, just him and the hoop. He missed the first few shots, adjusted, kept going. "You're playing." "All wrong." Jake spun around. A man sat on a nearby bench, arms crossed. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. Strong build, sharp eyes. His face was partially hidden under the hood of an old sweatshirt. Jake frowned. "Excuse me?" The man stood, stepping onto the court. "You're trying to play like them," he said, nodding. "Toward an imaginary team. But you're not them." "Yeah, thanks for the reminder." The man ignored the sarcasm. "You have size, strength. Instead of fighting against it, use it." Jake squinted. "And who exactly are you?" The man smirked. "Miller. Used to coach. Not that it matters." Jake's curiosity piqued. "You were a coach?" "Was," Miller confirmed. "A long time ago." Something about his tone made Jake hesitate before pushing further. Miller pointed at the ball. "Try something. Post up. Turn strong. Don't fade away." Jake hesitated, then tried again, backing toward an invisible defender before spinning into a shot. It felt awkward, weak. Miller shook his head. "Again." Jake repeated the motion, then again. "Lower your center. Use your weight. Make space." Jake adjusted. Better. For the next hour, under the dim lights of the street, Miller showed him movements, footwork, small adjustments that made his game feel different, more natural, more his. "You're never going to be fast like them," Miller said bluntly. "But speed isn't everything. Control the pace. Use your frame. Make them play your game, not the other way around." Jake was exhausted, but something inside him buzzed with energy. "Why are you helping me?" he finally asked. Miller shrugged. "Because I've seen a lot of kids with talent but no drive." "You're the opposite." Jake absorbed that, unsure how to respond. As he gathered his things, Miller called out, "Same time tomorrow, Carter." Jake paused, then nodded. "Yeah, same time." And for the first time in a long time, he felt something new. Hope. The air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked asphalt as Jake jogged toward the public court. His muscles ached from the last practice, but a strange anticipation pushed him forward. It had been a long time since anyone had believed in him, really. Believed in him. Coach Stevens tolerated him. His teammates mocked him. But Miller saw something. The court was empty except for the older man, who was already dribbling a basketball, his movements surprisingly fluid for someone his age. As Jake stepped onto the cracked pavement, Miller passed him the ball without a word. "Warm up," he ordered. Jake began his usual routine: layups, free throws, footwork drills. He still felt sluggish, still fumbled some movements, but he kept going. Miller watched in silence, occasionally nodding but never offering praise. After about 15 minutes, he spoke. "All right, enough." He took the ball from Jake's hands. "You're improving, but you're still not playing smart." Jake wiped sweat from his forehead. "I don't get it. You keep saying I need to use my size, but how? I can't just run people over." Miller let out a short laugh. "You think Shaq was just running people over? Barkley? They controlled space. They made defenders react to them." He stepped in front of Jake and spread his arms. "Try to get past me." Jake hesitated. Miller was shorter, older, not nearly as built as the guys at school. This shouldn't be hard. He faked left, then drove, right, expecting to push past with ease. But Miller's feet shifted quickly, his body angling perfectly to cut off Jake's path. Jake stumbled, nearly losing the ball. "Again," Miller said. Jake tried a second time. "Same result." "You're wasting movement," Miller explained. "You don't need to dance around defenders. Make them feel your weight. Control your space." They worked for over an hour. Miller showed him how to plant his feet, how to pivot with power, how to use his shoulders to create space without committing fouls. He drilled Jake on post moves, forcing him to repeat the same motions again and again. The more Jake practiced, the more natural it felt. After another exhausting round, Jake bent over, hands on his knees, panting. "Damn," he muttered. "This is harder than it looks." Miller chuckled. Basketball is all about leverage. Doesn't matter how tall or fast someone is. If you understand how to position yourself, you win. Jake nodded, absorbing every word. As he grabbed his water bottle, curiosity got the better of him. So, you used to coach? Miller's expression darkened just for a second. Yeah, a long time ago. What happened? The older man hesitated. Things didn't go the way I planned. Jake sensed the conversation was over, but something told him there was more to Miller's story. He let it go for now. Same time tomorrow? Jake asked. Miller smirked. If you don't quit first. Jake grinned. Not a chance. Days turned into weeks. Every night after practice, Jake met Miller at the court. He worked harder than ever, absorbing every lesson, pushing past every limit. Miller's training was brutal. He didn't tolerate laziness. He made Jake run sprints, perfect his footwork, repeat post moves until his legs burned, but it was working. At school practices, things began to change. Jake wasn't getting pushed around as easily. He was holding his ground, making better plays. He wasn't scoring much yet, but he was impacting the game. For the first time, his teammates didn't look at him like a joke. Well, most of them. Dylan still wasn't impressed. One afternoon, after a particularly rough practice, he cornered Jake near the locker room. Look at you, Dylan said, crossing his arms, putting in extra work. Cute. Jake sighed, already exhausted. What do you want, Dylan? Dylan tilted his head, smirking. I just don't get it. You really think you're going to change anything? That all this extra training is going to magically turn you into a star? Jake met his gaze. No, but it's going to make me better. Dylan let out a dry chuckle. Better isn't good enough. He stepped closer. You're still dead weight, Carter. And when it matters, you'll choke, just like you always do. Jake clenched his fists, but he didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had something now, something Dylan couldn't take from him. He had purpose. 2 nights before the biggest game of the season, Miller decided to test him. 1-on-1, Miller announced, tossing Jake the ball. First to 11. Jake grinned. You sure you can handle this, old man? Miller chuckled. Try me. The game was intense. Miller was quick, deceptively strong, and smarter than anyone Jake had played against. But Jake had learned. He posted up, used his body to shield the ball, forced Miller into tough defensive positions. The game stretched on, sweat dripping down both their faces. Tied at 10, Miller had the ball. He faked right, spun left, and Jake moved on instinct. He cut off the drive, forced Miller to adjust, then jumped at just the right moment. The shot missed. Jake grabbed the rebound, turned, and powered his way into the paint. One strong move. One clean finish, game over. Miller wiped sweat from his forehead, breathing heavily. Then, to Jake's surprise, he grinned. Not bad, Carter. Jake laughed, slumping onto the bench. You saying I actually learned something? Miller smirked. I'm saying you might be ready. Jake's smile faded slightly. Ready for what? Miller studied him for a long moment. Big game coming up, right? Jake nodded. Miller leaned in. Then it's time you stop just being on the team. Time you make them. See you. Jake's chest tightened. He had never been more ready for anything in his life. The gym was buzzing with energy. The bleachers were packed, students shouting, banners waving. The Lakewood Eagles were about to face their biggest rivals, the Westfield Warriors. This was the game that would determine whether they made it to the state qualifiers. The air felt electric, charged with anticipation and nerves. Jake sat on the far end of the bench, bouncing his knee, gripping a water bottle so tightly his knuckles turned white. His stomach twisted with anxiety. This was his chance, the moment Miller had been preparing him for. But there was one problem. He wasn't playing, not yet at least. Coach Stevens hadn't put him in the starting lineup. No surprise there. Jake had barely played meaningful minutes all season. Still, after weeks of grinding, of training with Miller, of pushing himself past every limit, he had hoped for a different outcome. Yo, Carter, one of the bench players. Nudged him. "You good?" Jake forced a nod. "Yeah, just focused." The whistle blew and the game tipped off. Dylan Harper took immediate control, weaving through defenders, sinking a mid-range jumper with ease. The crowd roared. On the next possession, he drilled a three-pointer, barely breaking a sweat. Jake watched, jaw clenched. Dylan was good. There was no denying that, but he played like he was the only one who mattered. Lakewood held the lead early, but Westfield wasn't going down easy. Their star forward, Jordan Knox, was a 6'5" powerhouse with explosive athleticism. He attacked the rim relentlessly, forcing fouls, getting to the free throw line. By the second quarter, the game was tied, and Lakewood was struggling. Coach Stevens called a timeout. The team huddled, sweat dripping, breaths heavy. "We need stops," Stevens barked. "We're letting Knox dominate the paint." Dylan wiped his face. "With his jersey. We just need to score more." "Not if we can't defend," one of the seniors shot back. "We need someone who can body him up." A brief silence. Jake felt it before he heard it. That moment of hesitation, that pause. Then, "Put Carter in." Jake's head snapped up. It was the assistant coach, Coach Reynolds, who had barely spoken to him all season. Stevens frowned, clearly unsure. "Coach, we need size down low," Reynolds insisted. "Carter's been working. Give him a shot." Stevens glanced toward Jake. Jake's heart pounded. Was this it? Was this the moment? Finally, Stevens exhaled sharply. "All right, Carter, you're in. Knox is yours." Jake swallowed hard. He was ready, or at least he hoped he was. As he stepped onto the court, he felt the weight of everything. The eyes on him, the whispers, the doubt. Dylan gave him a look as they lined up for defense. "Don't screw this up," he muttered. Jake ignored him. The next play started, and immediately Knox went at him. The Westfield forward caught the ball in the post, turned and charged. Jake braced himself. The impact was brutal. Knox slammed into him like a truck, trying to bulldoze through. Jake stumbled, feet sliding, but he didn't fall. He held his ground. Knox went for a hook shot. Jake got a hand up. The ball bounced off the rim. A miss. For the first time all game, Knox hadn't gotten an easy bucket. Jake barely had time to register it before Dylan snagged the rebound and sprinted down the court, sinking a quick jumper. The crowd erupted. Westfield inbounded the ball, and again Knox tried to attack Jake. Same move, same shoulder charge. This time Jake anticipated it, shifting his weight just enough to absorb the contact. Knox tried another shot, another miss. Jake grabbed the rebound. From the bench, Miller's voice echoed in his head. "Control your space." Something clicked. He wasn't just trying to stop Knox. He was dictating how Knox played, and Knox knew it. The next few possessions were a war. Every time Knox tried to score, Jake made it hell. He forced him into bad angles, tough shots, ugly misses. The frustration was evident in Knox's eyes. He wasn't used to someone standing in his way. Jake was making a difference. But Dylan wasn't happy. Lakewood still struggled offensively. Dylan kept forcing shots, taking risky plays, trying to do it all himself. And as the third quarter came to a close, Westfield capitalized. A steal, a fast break, a thunderous dunk. The scoreboard shifted. Westfield 52, Lakewood 50. The momentum was changing, and then disaster struck. Dylan drove hard into the lane, trying to shake off his defender. He planted his foot, went for a quick spin move, and slipped. He hit the floor hard. The gym gasped. For a second, everything stopped. Dylan clutched his ankle, face twisted in pain. Coach Stevens rushed over. Trainers checked him. Dylan tried to stand, but the moment he put weight on his foot, he nearly collapsed. It was over. Dylan Harper, the star of the team, was out. Panic spread through the players. The leader was gone. The go-to scorer was gone. Jake barely had time to process it before Stevens turned toward the bench. His expression was grim, calculating. Then he spoke. "Carter, you're running the offense." Jake blinked. "What? You heard me," Stevens said. "You're our best option inside. We run plays through you." Jake's stomach twisted. He wasn't a scorer. He wasn't the guy. But now, he had no choice. He took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's win this." The final quarter was a grind. Westfield knew Dillon was out, so they tightened their defense, pressuring every pass, forcing turnovers. Lakewood was struggling, the pressure mounting, but Jake was locked in. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't fast. But every time he got the ball, he used what Miller taught him. He posted up, backed down defenders, and controlled the tempo. Layup, foul, free. Throw 1 point at a time. The crowd started noticing. The bench started believing. With 30 seconds left, the game was tied. Lakewood had the ball. Shot clock winding down. Jake caught the pass in the post. Knox was on him, furious, shoving, trying to push him out of position. Jake faked left. Knox. A bit. Jake spun right, clean look. He jumped, released the ball. Time slowed. The ball hit the backboard, rolled on the rim, and dropped in. The gym exploded. Lakewood led by 2. Westfield had one last shot. They inbounded, rushed down court. Knox got the ball. He spun, faced Jake one last time. Jake didn't flinch. Knox shot, blocked. The buzzer sounded. Game over. Lakewood won. The crowd erupted. The bench stormed the court. Jake stood frozen as his teammates swarmed him, shouting his name. For the first time in his life, Jake Carter was the hero. The gym was still echoing with the cheers of the crowd. Jake stood in the middle of the chaos, his teammates swarming him, hands slapping his back, voices shouting his name. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just a background player. He wasn't a joke. He had won the game. Dillon sat on the bench, ankle wrapped in ice, watching everything with a clenched jaw. His usual smug expression was gone, replaced by something Jake couldn't quite read. Coach Stevens approached, his face unreadable. "Hell of a game, Carter." Jake nodded, still catching his breath. "You just put yourself on the map," Stevens continued. "But this was just one win. We've got state qualifiers next. You ready for that?" Jake's chest was still rising and falling with exhaustion, but he didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I am." Stevens studied him for a second longer, then nodded. "Good. You've earned your spot in the rotation." Jake barely had time to process that before his teammates dragged him into a victory huddle. For the first time, he wasn't the last one picked, the guy nobody wanted on their team. He belonged here, but in the back of his mind he knew this was only the beginning. Later that night, after the celebration had died down, Jake walked home, his bag slung over his shoulder. His body ached, his legs felt like lead, but his heart was still racing from the adrenaline. As he turned the corner onto his street, he saw a familiar figure leaning against the chain-link fence of the public court. Miller. The older man was watching. Him, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Jake walked up, setting his bag down with a thud. "You saw the game?" he asked. Miller smirked. "Saw you finally listening?" Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "You ever gonna just say, 'good job'?" Miller shrugged. "I'll save that for when you win the state championship." Jake exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Dillon's out. I don't know how bad, but it doesn't look good. Coach is putting me in the rotation, but I don't know if I can carry this team like he did." Miller's eyes narrowed. "Who said you have to carry anything?" Jake frowned. "Dillon was the star. If he's not playing, someone's got to step up." Miller stepped onto the court, bouncing a loose ball off the pavement. "You keep thinking this is about being a star. That's Dillon's game, not yours." He passed the ball to Jake. "You won that game because you played smart. You controlled the pace. You used your strengths. Do that again. Don't try to be something you're not." Jake caught the ball, gripping it tightly. "Now," Miller continued, nodding toward the hoop, "let's get to work." The next week was the most intense training of Jake's life. With Dillon sidelined, the team had to adjust. The offense no longer revolved around one player taking every shot. Now it was about movement, patience, and strategy. And at the center of it, Jake. He wasn't the go-to scorer. That wasn't his role. But he was the anchor. He set screens, protected the paint, made the right passes. He learned how to read defenses, how to find the open man, how to create opportunities without forcing plays. But not everyone was on board. During one brutal practice, tensions boiled over. The team was struggling, missing shots, turning the ball over. Frustration filled the gym, and then it happened. Jake caught a pass in the post, looked to make a play, but before he could react, a sharp voice cut through the noise. "Pass the damn ball, Carter!" Dylan, still in sweats, still on the bench, still pissed. His injured ankle rested on a chair, but his arms were crossed, his eyes burning with frustration. Jake froze for half a second, just long enough for the defender to swipe the ball. Another turnover. Coach Stevens blew the whistle. "Enough! Take 5!" As the players walked toward the bench, Dylan shook his head. "This isn't your team, Carter. Stop pretending like it is." Jake's hands clenched. He had spent years listening to Dylan tear him down, but this time something was different. He wasn't afraid anymore. Jake turned, walking right up to him. "You don't like the way I'm playing? Get off the bench and do something about it." The gym went silent. Dylan's jaw tightened. He didn't have a comeback this time. "Thought so," Jake muttered, walking away, and just like that, the balance of power shifted. The night before the state qualifiers, Jake found himself back at the public court, bouncing a basketball in the quiet darkness. Miller sat on the bench, watching. "You ready?" he asked. Jake nodded, but there was something in his expression, something unsettled. "What?" Miller pressed. Jake sighed. "Dylan's still pissed. He doesn't want me running the team." Miller leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Let me ask you something, Carter. Who gives a damn what Dylan Harper wants?" Jake blinked. Miller stood, walking onto the court. "You let him get in your head for years. Let him dictate how you saw yourself, but guess what? He's not playing tomorrow. You are." Jake swallowed hard. "You want his respect?" Miller continued. "Win. That's all that matters." Jake met his gaze. Then, without another word, he turned toward the hoop and took the shot. The stadium was packed. The roar of the crowd vibrated through the walls of the locker room as the Lakewood Eagles prepared to take the court. This was it, the state qualifiers. Win, and they moved on. Lose, and the season was over. Jake sat on the wooden bench, tightening the laces on his sneakers. His hands were steady, but inside, his heart pounded like a war drum. "You ready for this?" He looked up. Coach Stevens stood in front of him, arms crossed, studying him with sharp eyes. Jake nodded. "Yeah." Stevens gave a small nod back. "Good, because you're starting." The words hit like a shockwave. Jake had expected to play. He'd earned that much, but starting, that was something else. "Coach, are you sure?" Stevens cut him off. "Carter, I don't have time for doubts. Dylan's still not cleared, and we need your size in the paint. You've proven yourself. Now go out there and play your damn game." Jake swallowed hard, then nodded. This was real. The team huddled up before stepping onto the court. The energy in the air was electric. Adrenaline, nerves, excitement. As they jogged out, the noise hit like a wave. The Lakewood fans were loud, but the opposing crowd, supporting the heavily favored Ridgeway Titans, was louder. Jake spotted Dylan sitting at the end of the bench, arms crossed, watching with an unreadable expression. No insults, no eye rolls. Just watching. The whistle blew. Game on. The Titans came out strong. Their point guard was lightning quick, slicing through Lakewood's defense with ease. Their big man, a towering 6'8" center, controlled the rebounds early, overpowering Lakewood's front court. Jake's first few possessions weren't pretty. He was adjusting to the speed of the game, the pressure, the intensity. He got caught out of position twice, allowing easy baskets. On offense, he fumbled a pass, then missed a short jumper. He heard the murmurs from the crowd, the doubt creeping in. But then, Miller's voice echoed in his head. "Control your space." Jake took a deep breath. Reset. The next time the Titans center tried to back him down, Jake held his ground. He stayed low, forced the big man into a tough shot. Miss. On offense, he didn't force anything. He set screens, cleared space, let the game come to him. When the point guard drove and dished inside, Jake was ready. A quick move, soft touch, bucket. The crowd started noticing. Lakewood settled in. By halftime, the game was tight. The Titans led by 3, but it was clear they had expected an easy win. And Lakewood wasn't backing down. As they walked to the locker room, Jake caught Dylan's gaze. For the first time, there was no condescension, no mocking, just respect. The second half was a war. The Titans threw everything at them. Full court. Press, fast breaks, suffocating defense. But Lakewood fought back. Jake was in the thick of it. He battled for rebounds, took hits, set hard screens. He wasn't the flashiest player, but he was the anchor keeping the team steady. With 2 minutes left, the game was tied. The crowd was deafening. Lakewood called timeout. Players huddled around Stevens, breathing hard, sweat dripping. "All right, listen up," Stevens said. "They're expecting us to go to our shooters. But Carter," he turned to Jake, "I want the ball in your hands." Jake froze. "Me?" Stevens didn't flinch. You've earned this." Jake felt the weight of the moment, the trust, the responsibility. He nodded. "I got it." Timeout ended. Back on the court, the tension was palpable. The ball moved around the perimeter. The shot clock ticked down. Then Jake got the ball in the post. He felt the defender press against him, big, strong. But Jake had spent weeks preparing for this. He faked left. Defender bit, spun right. Open look. He rose for the shot. A hand slapped. Down hard on his arm. Whistle, foul. 2 free throws. Jake walked to the line. The gym felt silent despite the noise. He bounced the ball once, twice, breathed. First shot. Good. Lakewood led by 1. 1 more. He exhaled, focused. Second shot. Rolled. Around the rim. And dropped in, Lakewood up by 2. One last defensive stand. The Titans pushed the ball up. Their point guard drove, kicked it out for a desperation 3, missed. The buzzer sounded. Game over. Lakewood won. The bench exploded onto the court. Players tackled Jake, shouting, hugging, celebrating, and as the crowd erupted, as his teammates lifted him, Jake turned and saw Dylan Harper standing, not pouting, not sulking, standing and clapping. The bus ride back from the game was pure chaos. Players sang, laughed, and replayed the final moments over and over again. Coach Stevens sat at the front, arms crossed, a rare smirk on his face. Lakewood had done the impossible. They weren't supposed to win, weren't supposed to be here, but they were. And Jake Carter had just played the best game of his life. He sat near the window, his body sore, but his mind still racing. The night blurred together in flashes, his free throws, sealing the win, the roar of the crowd, his teammates tackling him in celebration. But the one image that stuck with him the most, Dylan Harper, standing, clapping. Jake wasn't sure what that meant yet. "Yo, Carter!" one of the seniors called. "Didn't know you had ice in your veins, man." Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "Neither did I." The bus erupted in laughter, but despite the celebration, Jake felt something else creeping in, something unfamiliar. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The next morning, Jake's body protested as he rolled out of bed. Every muscle ached. His ribs felt bruised from all the screens he had set, and his legs felt like cement. But none of that mattered. He had earned this pain. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Miller, Public Court. 9 a.m. No excuses. Jake let out a breathless laugh. The old man never quit. Neither would he. When Jake arrived, Miller was already there, bouncing a ball, waiting. The sun was barely up, the court empty except for them. "Didn't think you'd be awake," Miller said. Jake smirked. "Didn't think you texted," Miller chuckled. "Figured I'd join the modern world. Don't get used to it." Jake stretched, rolling his shoulders. "So what's next?" Miller spun the ball in his hands. "You tell me." Jake hesitated. He had spent so much time chasing something: respect, belonging, a reason to keep playing. Now that he had it, what came after? Miller must have seen the uncertainty because he tossed Jake the ball. "You think one game makes you great?" Miller asked. Jake caught it, frowning. "No." "Good," Miller said. "Because it doesn't." Jake exhaled. "So I just keep working." Miller nodded. "And one day, maybe, you'll be more than just some kid who won a big game." Jake looked at the hoop, then back at Miller. "I'm in." Miller grinned. "I know." And just like that, the training continued. A week later, during practice, something unexpected happened. Jake was running drills when Coach Stevens called his name. "You've got a visitor," Stevens said. Jake turned, wiping sweat from his forehead. Standing near the bleachers was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a polo shirt, a clipboard tucked under one arm. He had the presence of someone who belonged in the basketball world. Jake's heart jumped. A recruiter. The man walked over, extending a hand. "Mark Reynolds, Texas Hurricanes scouting team." Jake shook his hand, barely breathing. "I watched your last game," Reynolds said. "You've got potential, kid." Jake tried to play it cool, but his voice still came out rough. "Thanks." Reynolds studied him for a moment. "We're looking for players who don't just score, but impact the game. Guys who make their teammates better." Jake straightened. That was exactly what he had been trying to do. Reynolds nodded. "Keep playing like that and we might have a spot for you in our development program." Jake's chest tightened. "Wait, are you saying—" Reynolds smirked. "I'm saying, finish this season strong and we'll talk." Jake couldn't believe it. A real chance. A future. As Reynolds turned to leave, Jake felt a presence next to him. Dylan. They watched as the recruiter walked away. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Dylan let out a short laugh. "Guess I was wrong about you." Jake turned to him. "Yeah," Dylan nodded. "You proved it out there. You belong." Jake studied him. "That mean we're cool now?" Dylan smirked. "Let's not get crazy." Jake laughed, but this time it wasn't forced, because for the first time, Dylan Harper wasn't his enemy. That night, Jake found himself back at the public court, alone under the streetlights. He dribbled lazily, taking shots, missing some, making most. He wasn't thinking about the past anymore, not about the insults, the failures, the doubts. He was thinking about what came next, his future. A rustling sound made him glance over. A group of younger kids had gathered outside the fence, watching him. One of them, a short kid with oversized sneakers, hesitated before stepping forward. "Hey, Jake," the kid said, voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think I could be good too?" Jake smiled. He passed the ball to the kid. "Don't play like me," Jake said. "Play like you." The kid's face lit up. He took the shot. It hit the backboard, then swished through the net. Jake laughed, nodding in approval. And as he watched the kid run back to his friends, he realized something. This wasn't just about his story anymore. It was about all the kids who were told they weren't good enough. And Jake Carter, he was just getting started.
If you enjoyed the story and want to see more content like this, support the channel by subscribing, liking, and turning on notifications.